Good evening, and welcome to Space Place Canada's second online event. This is part 2 of Canada and the Final Frontier. Welcome. My name is Randy Atwood. I'm a Space Place Canada director, as well as a space exploration and planetarium enthusiast. This is actually Space Place Canada's third event. Our first was last January when we held our kickoff evening in person in downtown Toronto with CBC's Bob McDonald back before everything went online. So thanks again for joining us. It's going to be an exciting evening. Though we are stuck at opposite ends of a YouTube feed, please interact with us. If you're logged on into YouTube, use the comments to make comments, ask questions. We can see them here in our broadcast studio and we'll pass them along to our speakers. You can also reach us on Twitter at Space Place CDA with comments and questions, and even via email to chair@spaceplacecanada.ca, and we will post these links in the chat. We may even ask you some questions too. Use the comments to tell us where you are from and why you are interested in our project. Of course, to answer that, it might help to know what our project is. Space Place Planetarium Canada is a not-for-profit corporation composed of professionals from across Canada. Our leadership team is drawn from many astronomy and science advocacy organizations. What's our objective? Well, it is to bring a 21st century public planetarium to Toronto. To build support today through a virtual planetarium because of the situation that we're in. We've started with a website that will showcase excellence in STEAM education with a global reach while focusing on local curriculum events. We want to give a platform to the Canadian experience of crossing the boundary between Earth and space. This includes perspectives and voices from Canada's many different cultures, including those indigenous to these shores. Our virtual planetarium and eventual facility will be a showcase for how to use technology such as virtual reality, augmented reality, and artificial intelligence to build an innovative and exciting storytelling platform. Why do we want to do this? Well, we want to inspire. Space Place will be built for the love of science and technology. It will be built to inspire, to share knowledge, and to help explore the world around us. We will be a beacon of support for those looking to learn something new and exciting in space and Earth sciences. At Space Place, we will not only explore tomorrow, we will build for it as well. We know it is vital to promote engagement in STEAM, that is science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, STEAM topics, particularly to inspire young people to consider careers in STEAM, very important. Every day will be Career Day at Space Place. We believe that a facility like this belongs in Toronto. It's now 25 years since the McLaughlin Planetarium closed. Toronto is the largest city in the world that does not host a modern planetarium astronomical facility. We will, of course, need money to do all of this. Even before we start drawing up architectural plans, we will be producing engaging events such as tonight's event. And this costs money. Please consider supporting us. We are not yet a charity, but instead of a tax receipt, we're happy to send you gifts, that is merch, in return for your support. And we have some excellent ones tonight. For $30, we have a Space Place mask, and you'll see here modeled by our illustrious chair, Henry Lowden. Or if you prefer, and this is my favorite, a download card that will give you access to the actual classic planetarium music from Toronto's famed McLaughlin Planetarium. This includes music by planetarium composer Tim Clark. Here we go, loading stuff. Here is the mask that I was telling you about. This music that we're offering from the McLaughlin Planetarium archives was composed by Tim Clark and Michael Dana. So this is the actual music that, if you're old enough, you remember sitting in the planetarium and listening to this original music. This was rescued, the old tracks from old tapes just for this purpose. And so we have this now for you, for your own enjoyment. For $50, we'll send you a book. With the holidays coming up, we have several copies of An Earthling's Guide to Outer Space by CBC Quirks and Quarks host Bob McDonald, and a small number of other books, including Jay Ingram's The Science of Why, and a copy of Defying Limits by Canadian astronaut extraordinaire Dave Williams. Right now, we only have one copy of Dave Williams' book left, so the first person who goes online and donates $50 and requests it will get that book. For $100, you can have all three, the mask, the music, and a book. So there'll be a link in the chat where you can go and donate. If you can't see the link, head to spaceplacecanada.ca and click on Donate by PayPal. Please ensure that you include your email address because we need to contact you to ask you about your choice of gift. Space Place is fortunate to enjoy the support of several organizations for these events, including Stratia, who has created our brand and website, and Global Public Affairs. We're also delighted to have McDonald Detweiler as a Jupiter sponsor. And we're going to play a short video now for you from McDonald Detweiler where they're promoting their new robotics logo. Whether it's moonshots, microsats, or missions to Mars, the Great White North is set to make a big contribution to the global exploration of space. In part one, a few weeks ago, we looked at the history of Canada in space, both satellites and human spaceflight. This event is online and can be viewed. Look for a link to this on our Space Place Canada website. Tonight, we look at the future of Canada in the final frontier. I'm pleased to tell you that we have two special guests tonight. The first will look at robotic exploration of the Moon and Mars and how Canada will participate in those ventures. Our second guest will look into his crystal ball and see where Canadian astronauts may be heading to in the next couple of decades. It's an exciting time, and in spite of the COVID crisis, we welcome you to our special event this evening. How can you participate? Well, there will be an opportunity for you to send in questions for our guests. We plan to reserve time for each guest to respond to your questions. And at the end of the evening, we will have a roundtable with both guests and you, the participants. Our first guest is Faizan Ramatullah. Faizan is an engineer in the Guidance, Navigation, and Control Department at the McDonald Detweiler and Associates in Brampton. And that was the video that you just saw there. Hi, Faizan. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
Thanks very much for being our guest tonight.
You're welcome.
Let me tell everyone a little bit about you. Faizan has over 10 years of experience in the research and development of autonomous systems. He's the leading in the Lunar Surface Mobility Program at MDA, developing rovers for the Canadian Space Agency to support manned and unmanned exploration missions to the Moon. He's also developing the mobility system for the Mars Sample Fetch rover for the European Space Agency. The Sample Fetch rover is part of the Martian Sample Return mission, where space agencies from around the world are collaborating to execute the first mission to return Martian surface samples back to Earth. So this is all very exciting. Is this the kind of the video we saw a little rover? Is that something you're working on?
Yes, I am.
Well, that's great. Look, I don't want to keep you. I know you've got a talk all set up, so I'm going to throw it to you to talk to us. Your talk is called Back to the Moon, Advances in Robotics for Planetary Exploration. So Faizan, thank you, and we look forward to your chat.
Hi, thank you for that introduction. I'm going to talk about the advances in robotics for planetary exploration, the work that we are doing to go back to the moon, and onwards to further exploration of Mars. And to start off, I think we need to first ask ourselves, so what are we doing right now? And right now, we have an international space station that is going around the Earth. And on that space station, we have permanent human presence. Canada has contributed the Canadarms 1 and 2, which are currently operating on the space station. Space station is a fairly large facility. It's about the size of a football field. And it has been the place where we have done a lot of research and development to understand the impact of permanent human presence in space. Now, while we are on the International Space Station, learning more about how to work and operate in space, we've also got missions that are going to Mars. The image that you see is the image of a rover called the Mars 2020 rover that is on its way to Mars right now. It contains scientific instruments that will enhance the understanding of the surface of Mars for us. Here's an image of the rover being built and being tested at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in the United States. And with this, the rover is carrying some empty sample tubes to help execute the first Mars sample return mission. We've also got the ExoMars rover. This rover is planned to launch to Mars in the next launch opportunity. And on this rover, Canada contributed with the development of the mobility system. The mobility system is comprised of the wheels, the actuators, the steering mechanism. And the image that you see here is the image of all the engineers who worked on this system. Now that we know where we are right now and some of the upcoming opportunities, we need to ask, okay, so where are we going? And ultimately, we are geared towards looking at Mars as the ultimate destination. Mars is a very exciting place to explore. It has surface features that tell us that it used to be a warm and wet planet where liquid water used to flow. And with that, it gives us an opportunity to, in our backyard, to go explore and find out the process through which this planet went through. Now, Mars is a very difficult place to go. It has very extreme cold temperatures, but most importantly, it's really far away from Earth. And if you want to design something that can operate on Mars, you got to figure out and make sure that you've built the technologies, you've built the systems that would work reliably on these long duration missions to Mars. And for that reason, Moon is considered as the stepping stone. It's the place that we can go to understand how to execute these long duration Mars missions. Now, as part of our journey to Mars and looking at Moon as the stepping stone, the international community is developing the Lunar Gateway, the image of which you see on your screen. And Canada is contributing with the development of the Canadarm3. I call it the most interesting arm in space. I have a short video of the arm. And as we are building robotic systems to operate on the gateway, we will not only be going to a station around the moon, but we will also do exploration missions down on the lunar surface through these science rovers, like the one that you see here. Now, when you look at all this, you would question, well, how does space technology help us here on Earth? And one of the great things about Canadian contributions in space exploration is that we have taken what we have learned through development of robotic systems and have tried to find ways of how we can use it on Earth. One of the great examples is the development of the neuroarm. The neuroarm uses technologies that were built to operate an arm in space and is being used to help perform surgeries here on Earth. Thank you very much. I'll hand it back to you.
Okay, thanks. Thank you very much, Faizan. Tell me a little bit about your background. I heard that you got interested quite young in building robots to go out to other planets. How did that come around? Oh, okay. Faizan isn't with us anymore. All right, let's wait for him to come back. Oh, there he is.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. I was saying I was wondering how you got interested in this field. If you got interested from a young age.
Yeah, I got interested in space from a very young age. When I was growing up, I saw the work that astronauts were doing up on the International Space Station, and that excited me. And my curiosity was really to understand how such a system like the International Space Station can be built. How do you actually go around building something where you can work and operate in space and have humans living there? And that was the start that really got me into the space exploration. And then it just went on from there. I started learning more about the space station, and then started taking courses and directing my education in the direction where I could learn more about how aerospace engineering is done.
It's hard to believe that there have been people on the space station continuously for 20 years now. So someone in grade school could have, when the station started, gone all the way through and decided on a career based on that. So that's really interesting. The Mars sample return mission has been talked about ever since the Viking days in '76. Could you tell us a little bit more how it's going to work with Perseverance actually collecting samples that a future spacecraft will pick up and actually bring home?
Yeah, so the Mars sample return mission is really a three-part mission. The first part of this mission has kicked off with the launch of the Perseverance rover. Perseverance rover is carrying with it empty sample containers, and has all the instruments that are necessary for science teams on the ground to be able to understand where the Perseverance rover is going, what is the geological background of that site, and help them in picking up relevant samples that can be picked up and stored in these sample tubes. At the end of that mission, the Perseverance rover will leave those samples on the surface of Mars, so that a follow-on mission called the Sample Return Lander mission is going to go and pick up those sample tubes. There you would have another rover called the Sample Fetch rover that would go to the places where Perseverance has left off these containers, grab those samples from there, bring it up to a Mars Ascent rocket. Once placed on the rocket, the rocket would launch from Mars. And in Mars orbit, it would then meet another spacecraft called the Earth Return Orbiter that would then do the final leg of the return journey, bringing those samples from Mars orbit onto the surface of Earth. So that's the whole story. And the exciting thing is that the mission has been kicked off. Perseverance rover is already on its way, and we are on to executing the Mars sample return mission. I'm sorry, I cannot hear you.
Randy, your audio is off.
I'm sorry, my mute was on there. What I was saying was this will be the first mission where a Mars mission, the critical part of the Mars mission, is for one spacecraft to land near another Mars spacecraft. It's never been done before.
That's right. There are a lot of firsts in this mission, not only the one that you just described, but also the fact that this would be the first time that a rocket is going to launch from Mars. So in that way, it's not only that another spacecraft is going to land close to an existing rover, but also we're going to have a launch from Mars for the first time.
Similar to what China just did on the moon. They actually landed something on the moon recently and lifted off, and now it's in orbit around the moon, and they'll be heading back with lunar samples for the first time in several decades. So a lot of activity in the solar system.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, we're talking with Faizan Rahmatullah here from the McDonnell Detweiler, talking about Mars rovers and lunar rovers, and we invite you to send in your questions for Faizan to answer, and we'll ask them as they come in. Faizan, I was going to ask you about the difference between, there's a lot of talk about going to the moon first to prepare for Mars.
Right.
How different are the two environments?
The environment between Moon and Mars is extremely different. Mars, just look at temperatures. Mars, the lowest temperature on Mars goes down to around -125. Moon is a much colder place. There you can find places that could be as cold as -230 degrees. And the hot temperature on the moon can be about 120 to 130 degrees. On Mars, you see hot temperatures not more than 10 to 20 degrees. So the moon has a much wider temperature range compared to Mars. But the reason why you want to use moon as a stepping stone is really down to the distance. So Mars is so far away that if you want to execute a human mission to Mars, you have to first wait to make sure that both of these planets have aligned. Once they align, then we have these launch windows where we get the opportunity to launch something to go to Mars, and it's about a 6-month journey to get from Earth to Mars. Once you get to Mars, you have to kind of stay there up until you get another Earth-Mars launch opportunity. Where the two planets come in sync again, you can do a return trip, and that takes over a year. And then it takes 6 months to come back from Mars to Earth. So you're looking at about a 2-year mission. And you want to design technologies that work for that period of time and don't fail. And so in order for you to be able to develop the technologies, the hardware that would be required, in addition with the methods or processes or execution plans, you really need to be somewhere where you can execute these missions and practice them. And Moon is relatively close to us. It takes about 3 days to get there. So it provides us with a safe place where we can go and test out the systems that we build, make sure that they are reliable so that they can work on these long journeys, and then also learn how to execute these long duration missions. And that's why Moon becomes a stepping stone for the journey to Mars.
And how do you test this engineering on the Earth before you send it to, say, the Moon?
Everything that we build goes through a very rigorous testing process. And the problems, it's a very interesting problem to figure out how to actually test something to make sure that your engineering system is going to work in an environment that cannot be truly replicated here. And so what we do is we break the problem down into its smaller segments and look at each piece of that puzzle separately. I work in rovers, so I can give you an example of what we do for rovers. As it comes to rovers, Moon and Earth have vastly different gravities. So your car or your rover would behave very differently if you operated on Earth versus how it would behave when you operate on Moon. So we devise methods to offload the vehicle. We also have learned to create lunar soil simulants, and we use those simulants to be able to understand how our systems would behave in that lunar environment. We also do extensive thermal testing. So we have thermal chambers. We bring those thermal chambers down to the kind of temperatures that you would see on the Moon, and then test our systems to make sure that they can work in that environment.
We have a question from a viewer, and I like this question because we're familiar with the arm that's up on the space station right now, Canadarm2, and just the other day, a contract was signed between McDonnell Detweiler and the Canadian Space Agency for development on Canadarm3. So the question is, what is the difference between Canadarm2 and Canadarm3?
There are several differences between Canadarm2 and Canadarm3, but one of the most interesting things that I'll share with you is that Canadarm2 is operating in the low Earth orbit, and it's operating on the International Space Station. Now, the space station is always occupied by humans, but the Lunar Gateway is going to be farther away from Earth. And in trying to operate a system that is so far away, you really need to make sure that the system is highly autonomous. In addition, Gateway will also have extended periods of time when there wouldn't be any astronauts present on the Gateway. And so the Canadarm3, it's going to have artificial intelligence capabilities so that it can operate in an environment where you don't need constant human presence. And so in that respect, it's going to be much smarter. It's going to execute tasks at much higher level and be able to know what its health is like.
Okay, well that's great. Thank you for that. What we're going to do is we're going to move on to our next speaker. So, Faizan, I'll ask you to stand by for our discussion later on. Faizan, you've given us a great, look at what's going to be happening from a robotics point of view on the moon and on Mars. Our next speaker is Chris Gaynor, who is a space technology historian. And I've known Chris for many years. We've had a lot of fun times together down at space shuttle launches and whatever. Chris is he's a writer. He's written 4 books on space exploration and aeronautics, and his articles have appeared in various specialty publications and Canadian newspapers. He holds a PhD in the history of technology from the University of Alberta, and has taught history of at the University of Victoria. Taught history at the University of Victoria and at CFB, Royal Military College of Canada. We're going to definitely talk to Chris about the Hubble Space Telescope because he's just finishing up a history of the Hubble telescope for NASA. Chris is also the editor of Quest magazine, The History of Spaceflight. It's an amazing magazine. If you have any interest in space history, I would look into a subscription of Quest. And also, he's the immediate past president of the Royal Astronomical Society and a fellow of the British Interplanetary Society. And Chris has written, several of his books on Canadian history, space history. One of them is a really detailed look at how Canadians and some British who were working on the Avro Arrow contributed to putting men on the moon in the Apollo program. So if you're interested in that, Chris's book is the one to look at. We don't have a video of Chris during his presentation, but we will have video of Chris later on. So Chris, if you can hear me, I'll ask you to present your presentation, Canada's Future in Space. There we go.
Hello there, can you hear me? Hello.
We can hear you, Chris.
Alrighty. So yes, I am more accustomed to looking backwards, but of course, in the space business, we like to look forward, and so that's what we're going to do today. But Randy said I was going to look through my crystal ball, which is correct. But the crystal ball is kind of fuzzy, and it has little antennas or things poking out from it. Yes, this is a mandatory reference to our overly familiar companion for this year, the COVID-19 coronavirus. And this, as in so many other things, the coronavirus is going to have a big impact on the future of space exploration in the next few years, simply because it seems to be gobbling up everything in its path, including a lot of money, and it's affecting a lot of priorities on Earth. Obviously, a lot of interest in health. It seems to be really pointing a lot of things, although we may not have noticed it yet, but in the direction of dealing with climate change, and so that will affect space activities. But even without the coronavirus, there are a number of changes going on, first of all, I'm going to start off with changes in Canada. A few weeks ago, Lisa Campbell, who you see here at the left, became the first woman to be president of the Canadian Space Agency. And of course, that's an exciting development. It is interesting. Lisa replaces Sylvain Laporte, who held that job for 5.5 years, which is actually a long tenure. Both of them have quite distinguished records as civil servants, but they aren't known to the general public. That is kind of a change in leadership style. a number of years ago, the Canadian Space Agency had a couple of different astronauts serving as president. And the first one, Mark Garneau, didn't last that long because he got called away to politics. And of course, he's our Minister of Transport now. And then he was followed by Steve McLean, who I think worked really hard at the job, but perhaps got out of sync with the politics going on in Ottawa. So that brought his term to an end. A few years ago, when Stephen Harper was Prime Minister, the CSA was seen as being in some trouble. So he brought in General Walter Nitinchuk, former Chief of Staff of the Canadian military, to be president of the CSA. But that didn't last too long because General Nitinchuk was needed to fix a kind of a festering political problem for the Harper government and Veterans Canada. So now we're kind of into this era where it's being run by civil servants. I've also included Justin Trudeau, our Prime Minister, in the slide. Now he's been Prime Minister now for I think he's just entered his 6th year as our Prime Minister, but a year ago, his government was reduced to minority status, and I think the odds are pretty good that we're going to have an election in the coming year. Now, so far, provincial governments that have thrown elections amidst the pandemic have done quite well, and I think the odds. I think Canadians have given his government fairly high marks for that. But he has, I think, a more formidable opponent in the leadership of the Conservative Party than he did last time in Aaron O'Toole. So that will be interesting. And of course, the pandemic will be a little further along by the time we get to an election. In any case, I would think in terms of his government support for space exploration, in common with a lot of his predecessors, regardless of their political stripe, his government has been a bit of a disappointment. But he has made one major initiative in space, which is getting Canada involved in the Lunar Gateway, which we'll talk about in a moment. And that photo was taken early in 2019 when he got Canada on board in the Lunar Gateway. Then there's that little change that's going on in Washington right now. Donald Trump is leaving office unwillingly, but he's still leaving, we think. And he's being replaced with Joe Biden, who you see at left in the photo at right. And this is a very old photo of Joe Biden, but he's seen there with his very good friend and fellow moderate Democrat, John Glenn, who is they were both spent a long time in the U.S. Senate. Now, a lot of criticism can and has been offered about the Trump administration. I think in terms of space exploration, a lot of people would give Trump and his NASA administrator, Jim Bridenstine, fairly high marks. And they have set up the Artemis program, which is to take humanity back to the moon and ultimately on to Mars. Although, of course, that's way off in the future. Now, the stated goal of Artemis is to get humans back on the moon by 2024, which would have been within Donald Trump's second term had he got one. That goal has always looked a little dubious because it's very ambitious, And a number of people have pointed out when we were at this distance from 1969 in the 60s, we had a pretty good idea of how the landing was going to go, and that's not the case here with Artemis. There's also the little matter of Congress setting aside the money that's needed for Artemis. While it has increased NASA funding, it has not been adequate for a landing in 2024. But anyway, as we've seen in recent years, when the administration changes, NASA's priorities change, and while Biden has shown some interest in space over the years, it hasn't been one of his signature issues. When he was vice president under Barack Obama, he was involved in President Obama's, I think, signature space initiative, which was setting up the Commercial Crew Program, which I'll mention in a minute. But where he's going to go with Artemis, it's hard to tell. Space did not really figure in the presidential campaign that just wrapped up. But anyway, this year has been a big year for the Commercial Crew Program, especially SpaceX. Both Boeing and SpaceX have been developing their own commercial crew spacecraft, where they actually own the spacecraft and the rocket, and they basically sell the service or lease a spacecraft to NASA or whoever else chooses to purchase the service. And I think this is a very exciting development that this is going ahead. I think it's going to open up space to other players, and I think it's been a very good policy, certainly so far. So we've had two of the Crew Dragon SpaceX launches, and you can see that at the right, one of those rockets. Two of them have gone to the International Space Station. NASA paid the freight. NASA is basically the anchor tenant for these. In the center, we have the Boeing Starliner, which is having a few more teething problems than SpaceX, but hopefully in the coming year, Boeing will get going. And that will provide options for NASA. If one system has problems, they can go somewhere else, but also for other clients. Now, at the left, you can see our current Canadian astronaut corps. Of course, David St. Jacques at the right is a year ago, I believe, was on the International Space Station, and he came back. So he's had his flight. Next in line, who's over at the left, is Jeremy Hansen. And then we have our two new recruits in the middle, Jennifer Sidey Gibbons, I believe is her name, and Joshua Kotrick, who are waiting for rides. Now, Canadian astronauts have been going up every few years for long-term trips on the space station, but Commercial Crew does open the possibility of Canadian astronauts just being purchased seats on one of these spacecraft to go up and do some exploration on their own. There's no sign that this is in the cards, but it is a possibility. In any case, one of these vehicles will be the probable ride for the upcoming Canadian astronauts. Of course, St. Jacques flew up on the Soyuz, which was the Russian spacecraft that filled in for the shuttle over the last few years and getting people up and down to the International Space Station. So the last number of years, the ISS has been kind of in the middle of Canada's human space program. The current agreements have Canada or have the partners of the ISS involved until 2024. A lot of people believe that that'll be renewed up to 2028. And then the question is, what comes after? Will it continue to go along, or will it be deorbited, or will it be taken apart and transformed into other things? But that's a big question coming down the pike. And so when you're looking in your crystal ball, you have to look at this gigantic project. So here's the Lunar Gateway, which we just heard about a few minutes ago, I showed that photograph of Justin Trudeau announcing that Canada would spend $2 billion over a number of years to support Canadarm3 on the Lunar Gateway. The Lunar Gateway could be affected by the politics going on in Washington. A lot of people think that if we want to go to the moon, why don't we just go straight to the moon? Why do we need a gateway? But there are arguments for the gateway. It provides a number of options for people who want to go to the moon, perhaps do some exploration in lunar orbit. It may give you more options in terms of the spacecraft that you need to send to get to the lunar surface, all sorts of things like that. But I think it should be taken into account that there is an argument about the need for the gateway, and that will be a decision that the Biden administration will have to make, I suppose, in cooperation with Congress. So another big thing that's coming up is, hopefully in less than a year from now, next October, the James Webb Space Telescope is going to be due to be launched. It's been postponed many times. It is a big NASA project, but the European Space Agency is involved. In fact, it's going to be launched on an Ariane rocket from Kourou. And Canada is also a major player in this. It's providing one of the instruments and some of the kind of the heart of the fine guidance system for JWST. It's the follow-on to Hubble. It's much bigger than Hubble. It's much farther away than Hubble, and if it doesn't work, it's going to be in a lot deeper trouble than Hubble got into when it had problems earlier on. But if it works, it will mean some exciting astronomy looking back to the early days of the universe. So just to kind of wrap up my presentation, I want to mention some other things. Canada has all sorts of balls in the air, so to speak. An important part of our space program over the last quarter century has been RadarSat. We had RadarSat 1 and RadarSat 2, which were quite successful. Last year, RadarSat Constellation, which consists of 3 satellites, they were put in orbit and are sending back data from their synthetic aperture radar to Earth. They have 7-year lifetimes. I suspect there would be a lot of hope that Canada will be pursuing the RadarSat concept with the next generation RadarSat, but I haven't heard anything about that. I do notice that Canada is developing a program called Wildfire Sat, which will keep track of forest fires and things like that. And of course, that's of increased importance in the era of climate change. Just earlier this year, we had a big success in deep space. The OSIRIS-REx spacecraft grabbed an asteroid sample, and is in the process of bringing it back, and Canadian instruments were at the heart of that. We've had Canadian instruments on Mars, for example, in the polar lander, I think Phoenix it was called, and elsewhere. NASA is thinking about a Mars ice mapper mission, which would have a Canadian radar instrument similar to RadarSat. Space Q has recently reported that we might finally see the day when a satellite is launched from Canadian soil. As I think everybody should know, all our satellites have been launched from other countries, the United States, Russia, India, Kourou, various other places. Getting back to some of the core things, we have the new leadership at the CSA, as I mentioned. Right now, it has a consultation going on future space policies over the next few weeks. So probably in the coming year, we should see some new space policies, but they may be affected by the political winds in Canada. The MDA last year wound up being a kind of part of an American company, but it was restored to Canadian status this year. Not the first time that's happened, but a very desirable thing. And part of that desirability is that we see it in the presence of their support for this event. And hopefully that will continue. A few years ago, we lost ComDev International. It was sold to Honeywell. We have to keep an eye on the health of the Canadian industry. And one initiative that the government has taken, it's Telesat Canada, which provides communication satellite services, has always been a bit of a public-private thing. It's going private, but the Canadian government recently announced it was spending quite a bit of money to purchase internet broadband services. So that's a good thing for that part of our space industry, because communication satellites have been a big part of the Canadian story. It's not always known, but certainly, for example, that's where MDA got its start. So I will stop this presentation, and I have to disappear for a minute or two, and I will be reappearing very, very shortly.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Yeah, he's got to do a bit of a disappearing act, but he'll be back. So now is your chance to ask questions to our speaker, Chris, as he comes back, a little bit on his talk, his future in space. And then we'll bring back Faizan to wrap things up and talk a little bit more about both the sending people into space, but also sending robots to the moon and Mars. Here's the man from Victoria, British Columbia.
Yes.
Chris, I wanted to ask you, first off, a little bit about Hubble. I mean, you're just kind of finishing up a history on Hubble for NASA. How is Hubble, and how long can we expect it to be alive?
Well, that's the big question. It's aging. Fortunately, it's aging slowly because it's been more than 11 years since the last shuttle servicing mission visited Hubble. And when things conk out now, there's going to be no repairs there. And but there's lots of signs that it still has a few years left in it. The people who work on Hubble hope to get at least a couple of years of joint operations with the James Webb Space Telescope, where they would both be kind of looking at similar objects in real time. And it looks it looks like if James Webb is not held up or has problems, that should be able to happen. The weak spot with Hubble is its gyroscopes, and it has 6 of them. 3 of them have failed, but they were known to have shorter lifespans. But the other 3 are still going, and the folks at NASA have developed workarounds in case more of them fail. But eventually, when you lose all 6, you're going to have problems.
You were mentioning the report of a potential Canadian launcher or launching satellites from orbit or from Canadian soil. So would this be an East Coast launch site? What kind of payloads would a launcher have? I wouldn't suspect that they would be all that great.
Yeah, probably small sets. Like there's been a lot of talk about a launching site, I think, out in Cape Breton in Nova Scotia recently. I'm not sure exactly where that's gone, and the report on SpaceQ, which was just a few weeks ago, was more talking more about a policy change that the Canadian authorities were going to look on these concepts a bit more favorably than they have in the past. So I think it's still a ways away, but see, the Canadian kind of various agencies, academic institutions, and things like this have been looking at small sats, and there have been a number of Canadian small sats in the last few years, and I think this is what we would see being launched in Canada.
I want to talk a little bit about the return to the moon. Obviously, in the 60s, it was a grandiose effort to get to the moon as quickly as possible because there was a competition between the U.S. and the Soviets. Here we've got this essentially the politicians in the States trying to fit a moon landing into what would have been the current administration's second term. Looking back in 2004, that current president said we would have met people back on the moon by 2019, 2020, and then the next administration kiboshed that. Seems to be such a disconnect between reality and politics when it comes to planning these these long-term space programs, which you need, say, to get to the moon and to Mars. Can you comment on that?
Well, there's reality and there's political reality, and that's a bit of a problem that we have in Canada. I think there's a lot of people who are enthusiastic about or interested in space, positive about space, but I'm not. There just hasn't been a huge number of votes riding on it, and you bring up an interesting point. The space program we have now derives to a certain extent from George W. Bush's vision for space exploration and the Constellation program, and that was really aimed at Mars. And then Obama got in, and well, that's a bit too ambitious. And Obama was interested in taking the Orion spacecraft, which came out of Constellation and is still going, by the way, still being developed. He wanted to take that to an asteroid, and I actually thought that's kind of a neat idea. But I think my viewpoint and interest in that is very much a minority one. You're either a moon person or a Mars person, and you have people like Robert Zubrin and all this saying, "Oh well, the moon is just a big distraction. We got to go to Mars," and then now we have these wild cards, like Elon Musk, just saying, "Well, I'm going to Mars," and we had an interesting development in that field yesterday with his kind of failure / successful test of his new rocket. So, and Biden Biden just hasn't said a great deal. I my suspicion is that he will I think he will kind of continue on with an Artemis or an Artemis-like program, but without the 2024 goal. I think the moon is kind of something that a lot of people are interested in. The idea of getting the first woman on the moon, I think, has captured people's imaginations. There's a lot of interest in the United States Congress in some of these programs, and the Space Launch System, the great big rocket, and the Orion spacecraft are often called the Senate space program. And I think this is a place where Joe Biden can make friends in the Senate, which he may well need to fulfill some of his other goals. But obviously, one part of NASA that's going to do well under a Biden administration is the Earth science work that comes out of Goddard. But that's kind of a small thing compared to going to the moon, at least in terms of space programs.
We used to launch rockets into space, not into orbit, but sounding rockets up into space, but they came back down with science instruments out of Churchill, Manitoba. Whatever happened to that program?
Oh, well, I think the Mulroney government wound that up, in the 1980s, and I know there was an attempt to build a private spaceport there in the late 80s or early 90s, and that's kind of the last I've heard. But there have been various ideas about launching spacecraft from various places, I think, including that one. I think there was an idea to launch them out here in Vancouver Island. But I think basically a market has to be created for that, and I think that's still well off in the future.
I think the average person may not know exactly how much money is going into funding space. And of course, a lot of the funding for space is to pay the salaries of highly technical people. But could you comment a little bit about how much Canadians are spending on space every year, and how long, like what the budget's been like over the last 20 years, but also the percentage of the overall budget, so just so that we can get an idea?
Well, I was just checking those numbers before I came on here, and the budget of the space agency is about, the Canadian Space Agency is about, I think, $345 million, which is about a 1,000th of the budget of the federal government, which is about $350 billion. And even on a per capita basis, kind of a rule of thumb is that there's 10 times as many people in the United States. But even on a per capita basis, what we spend on space in Canada is much smaller than in the United States. What is it? It's like about a quarter, just on a per capita basis, of what's spent in space. And $345 million may sound like a lot of money, but there are individual hospitals in Canada, like some of those hospitals you would find on University Avenue, that spend more than the entire Canadian space program. And that's not a criticism of healthcare. We're learning how important healthcare is, but it just gives you a bit of an idea of the scale, because I think a lot of people think that NASA spends a lot more money and that we spend a lot more money on space than we actually do. It's not very much, and we get a lot of bang for our buck. Not only astronauts going up, but a lot of jobs are created. There's a lot of sales, for example, for communications, satellite components and things like that. we get a lot of exports out of that, which is good for the economy.
Definitely. Okay, I want to bring Faizan back into the conversation. And hey, Faizan, welcome back.
Hi. Hello.
Hi, can you hear us?
Yes, we can. I can.
Okay, there's a question for all of us, or especially for you two. What's the weirdest space exploration idea that you've come across?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that question.
Okay, what is the weirdest space exploration idea that you have ever heard of?
What is the
Weirdest.
Oh,
In other words, some strange idea that someone comes to you and say, why don't you send, I don't know, mice to Mars or something like that? Have you ever heard anything like that?
One idea that I've heard of is that at some point somebody wanted to send a lot of robots to the moon so that they could do advertisements from the moon, where they could have a bunch of robots and they could make logos of companies and people could see it from Earth. I don't think that idea went anywhere. It was too impractical, but that sounds to me like the weirdest I've heard.
Chris, how about you?
Well, and of course, there's a lot of ideas like that to put advertisements in orbit around the Earth. Oh gosh!
Didn't the Soviets shoot a Pepsi commercial on Mir way back when?
That's right. They did do that, and I hear there are. Well, of course, we're coming up to these things where they're going to be shooting movies in space. That Tom Cruise is going to be going up. I'm not sure I would call that weird, but I mean, some of the stranger ideas, of course, involve contacting aliens, or based on the idea that we might run into them, and I think we're going to have to look a little farther and further afield before we find any. So I think I'll leave it at that.
Okay, here's another question. Where do you think private sector, that is SpaceX, Blue Origin, Virgin players are headed? Will they be integral to space programs in 5 years? And will SpaceX lead us to Mars mission?
I'll start off. I think this is a really exciting development that the private sector has a bigger role in space exploration, because it means that our ability to go into space is not dependent on the whims of a single government. It means that there are more options for people who want to go into space and have the means to do so. And I think it may take a while, but the effects of that will be incalculable, and hopefully mainly positive. So I think that's the important thing. Right now, up to now, we've been in a situation where, if say the government gets distracted by coronavirus and the money goes elsewhere, then that means a shutdown of spaceflight, or there's an accident. You're dependent on a single system like the shuttle, and there were 2 times we had accidents, it was shut down. In theory, now we have options. If there's a problem with SpaceX, then the Boeing thing can take its place, or what have you. So I think that's a good thing, and I'll let Faisal answer the Mars question.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It's a very exciting time to see these private space companies emerge and take an active role in providing a service that used to be largely supported by government space agencies. What seems to me as something very interesting is that with the addition of these private space companies like SpaceX, the cost of launching something in space has come down quite a lot. And so over in the long run, as I see the private sector continuing to operate in the space sector and the launch costs further come down, it's going to open up the opportunities for us to do a lot more exciting missions in space. One of the big costs of doing a project in space exploration is the cost of launching something, and so it's really exciting to see that happen. And I mean, if you ask me, I'm very excited with the work that the private space companies are doing in getting us to Mars. Once that interplanetary transportation system opens up, it's going to be very exciting for us to have repeated robotic and human missions to the moon and Mars.
Chris and I go back a ways, and we often talk about what happened just after the first moon landing, and there was talk about a mission to Mars, and it always seemed to be a carrot on the end of a stick. That's 20 years away, and it continues to be at least 20 years away. I wanted to ask Faizan about the possibility that we have this sample return mission from the Chinese going on right now. What about using the robots that you're working on now to do the same thing?
So I am in fact working on the projects for Mars sample return, and so yeah, we do have ongoing projects and future plans to do sample return from both Moon and Mars.
What about Chris, the timeline for our astronauts? This week, the Americans announced 18 of their astronauts that are going to be Artemis astronauts to go to the moon. There were no international astronauts there. What is the timeline for our Canadians to potentially be going to Gateway and going to the moon? Is that you think a decade out?
That's as good a guess as any, I would say. But it sort of depends on whether the Biden administration continues with Artemis, at what pace it continues, and where Gateway fits into those plans. I just thinking about it a little bit. The removal of the 2024 goal, which I think is probable, may help save Gateway, because a lot of people are saying, well, if you're in a big hurry to go to the moon, we don't have time to build Gateway, and if it kind of goes at a bit more leisurely pace, then there might be a chance to go ahead with Gateway, and obviously at some stage a Canadian would be part of it. Canada's contribution to the ISS is just 1 or 2%, and I suspect it's kind of a similar thing to Gateway. So that gives you an idea of how often we're going to get to fly. So a decade is a good guess, but there's a lot of variables there.
Okay, we've got another question that's come in from our viewers. The viewer is asking about the MOST satellite, and is it still running? And regardless of the answer, will there be a follow-up? I know that MOST shut down a few years ago. Just for background, MOST is an astronomical telescope that was in orbit around the Earth, such that it was always had one side facing the sun and the other side was facing stars on the night side of the Earth. and it could observe stars continuously for weeks at a time. This was a project Jamie Matthews out of UBC ran, and Utias in Toronto built the telescope. Not sure if there's a follow-up plan. I know that there was another spacecraft built similar to MOST. I think it was Nanosat. Is that right, Chris? Do you remember that one?
Yeah. But I don't know that much about it. In Canadian astronomy right now, the major proposal that's kind of come up for space-based astronomy, aside from our participation in JWST, which is certainly very notable, is a vehicle called CASTR, which would be observing mainly in ultraviolet frequencies, and it would have kind of a wide field capability. When Hubble is able to observe in ultraviolet wavelengths, and that ability is going to be lost when Hubble goes. And there's always been kind of an interest in Canada observing in those wavelengths, and so this proposal has come up. I'm not sure whether it's going to get support. It certainly is far larger and more ambitious than MOST. I don't honestly know if there's another follow-up to MOST right now.
Faizan, I was interested in your comment about AI on the rovers, and especially on the Canadarm3. Where do you see AI going? I mean, it's I look at someone, the astronaut who spent a year on the space station. When he returned to Earth, he was pretty well laid up for a month. He couldn't. He was in bad shape, really. And if we send people to Mars, once they get to Mars, the main thing they're going to have to do is perform a crucial Mars landing. To me, that doesn't sound all that feasible. Are we going to have to wait until maybe a C-3PO or some sort of AI assistant can help us land on Mars once we get there? Because as human beings, we don't fly in space all that well.
Yeah, well, if you think about it, we send robotic missions to Mars, and they don't require any human input, and they fly from here. We launch our rockets, and then they enter the Mars atmosphere, slow down, descend, and land onto the surface. So as it comes to that aspect of the launch and landing process, I think we're already there where we don't really need the human to do anything. In fact, I actually believe that humans are not going to be really good at it. Computers are far more responsive to the kind of environment that your spacecraft goes through as it's trying to land onto the surface. So. But as it comes to AI, but I would mention that when you look at a launch or a landing sequence, it's all following traditional programming principles, where you understand the entire environment, and you end up executing a set of instructions that the spacecraft goes through, the actions that it has to take to do what it needs to do. What's interesting with AI is the ability for the computer to be able to understand the environment and be able to deduce the next step. That aspect of AI is in its early stages, and it's continuing to grow. But AI would become really a key part or key piece of the future human missions or future robotic missions to Moon and Mars.
And Chris, what are your thoughts about the next lunar landing with people. They'll be in a spacecraft that has 100,000 times more computing capacity than the lunar modules from the 60s. They should be a piece of cake, right?
I would think so. You know, of course, that's the fascinating part of Apollo is how little computing power they had back then. So yeah, in theory, it should be simpler to land there, but it's still a bit of a challenge. So.
Well, gentlemen, I'm going to end up with one more question before we close for the evening. And this is sort of, we've been looking in the next decades, but maybe this is looking farther. Beyond the moon and Mars, what should our next major target be? I would probably vote asteroids, but you know, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, there are asteroids that are certainly very interesting for us to go to, but there are also moons of some of the other planets, like moons around Jupiter, for example, Europa. So Europa has a layer of ice on top, and underneath that layer, it has liquid water. Those moons of other planet to me appear to be very interesting places to go for scientific research. So I would put asteroids and moons of other planets as on my bucket list.
Chris, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I would agree with Faison on that. And obviously, there's a lot of work to be done exploiting the moon and Mars once we get there. It's going to be quite a challenge. Some of these environments around Jupiter and things like that because of the radiation, and also we have to be careful about the forward contamination from humans. You know, there's possible life in these water layers, and we have to be careful with that. You know, the gas giants are problematical, of course. Something I'll just throw out there: Pluto, which is way out there and is a huge challenge to even get to, is going up to be a fascinating little place. So maybe one day people will go there, but I think we'll all be gone by then.
Well, I certainly hope we see a descendant of one of Faison's rovers on Pluto one of these days.
Right.
But it's going to take a pretty big flashlight, apparently.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us tonight and sharing your wisdom and experiences with us. Faison Rahmatullah from MDA and Chris Gaynor. Pleasure to be with you both, and take care and happy holidays to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
And with that, I'm going to close things off for tonight, this special event from Space Place Canada. I invite you to look for future events similar to this in the future. Please add your email address to our mailing address so you don't miss out on future events. We're planning an event in the new year. It's going to be looking back and forward in Canada's history of astronomy, astronomical research, and planetariums. So please follow us on our website, spaceplacecanada.ca, and on our Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram sites. My name is Randy Atwood. Thanks again for joining us tonight and participating and providing some great questions. Stay safe, everyone, and wear your mask and social distance, and happy holidays.